Guard skills in Path of Exile are a class of active skills that provide a short-term buff to survivability. For a new player, it is hard to tell which one is useful for them and which one they should include in their build. Therefore, in this video, I will give a detailed explanation of how they work and which one you should use under which circumstances. But before we get into it, I'm excited to tell you about the sponsor of this video. I've been checking out this early access software called YAHAHA, a creation platform that lowers the barrier of entry and makes it really accessible for anyone to build an interactive experience in a 3D world. You can publish your work easily and share it with your friends in multiplayer mode. Bring your dreams to life and start designing your own little game with this simple and fun tool, which is also completely free to use. After you've signed up and downloaded it, there are a ton of tutorial resources to get you started, and when you're ready to start creating your own space, there's a variety of different templates to pick from. The controls to navigate the camera are really straightforward, as are the tools for modifying the position and scaling of objects in your world. The asset store has hundreds of free 3D models and sounds and background music to get you started. Create your own landscape from scratch with the editor that works with simple brush tools and allows you to paint your world and decorate it with a bunch of objects. When you're done designing your world, you can define your gameplay, that is, what rules your game has and how it works. You can choose what your avatar can do, define items that can exist in your world, how they work, and create crafting recipes which allow players to combine different items into new items. At any point in the process, you can test your work, enter play mode, and run through the world with your avatar. If you run into a writer's block situation and don't know what you want to do, you can explore games that are published by all the other awesome creators in this community. I'm sure by now this sparked your interest, so if you want to, give it a try and download YAHAHA by clicking the link below or scanning the code on screen. Thank you, and thank YAHAHA. There are a total of 6 different guard skills. There are 4 different guard skill gems. One of them has a Vaal skill version. The 6th guard skill is granted by an ascendancy. All of them are instant spells, meaning they have a cast time of 0. Their cooldown only starts after their buff duration ends. While their individual cooldowns may be different, all guard skills share their cooldown with other guard skills. That means when you use a guard skill, it puts any other guard skill on cooldown as well. This is why most builds use exactly one guard skill, with the exception of one that is a Vaal skill, as that Vaal skill gem grants the regular version of the skill alongside the Vaal version. Every one of them works slightly differently and shines under different circumstances. And the most commonly used ones are Steelskin and Molten Shell. Both of them are strength skill gems. They both become available in Act 1 after finishing the Breaking Some Eggs quest in Mudflats for Duelist, Marauder, Templar, and Scion. On Witch, Shadow, and Ranger, you have to wait until you completed the A Fixture of Fate quest in Act 3 library, or until you have Lilyroth available in your hideout. Of course, you can also buy them from other players. Steelskin is the bread and butter guard skill that everyone should use until they fulfill certain requirements that make other ones better. It lasts for 1.5 seconds and has a 3-second cooldown time. During its duration, it provides a buff to your hit pool that becomes stronger as it levels up. 70% of the damage from hits is taken from the buff before it is taken from your life or energy shield up to a certain value. At gem level 20, that buff value is 2,209 damage. This means it can reduce up to 3,155 damage by 70%. For higher hits or sums of hits, the relative reduction falls off as it is capped by the buff value. Guard skills happen after all other mitigation when receiving damage. Steelskin also provides immunity to bleeding during the buff. Also, note that bleeding is a different effect from the corrupting blood debuff. Since all guard skills are instant cast, you can put them on your left mouse button to automatically activate every time they come off cooldown while issuing move commands. This works well with Steelskin, but is also quite common with other guard skills. The upside is you don't have to micromanage and play reactively, while the downside is you have less control over when it is up and when it is not. The most efficient way in terms of mitigation would be to actually use the skill manually, but a lot of builds already require you to press a lot of buttons and you might not have enough keybinds. Therefore, another common use is also to link them to a cast when damage taken support gem, so that they'll automatically go off once a certain amount of accumulated damage from hits is reached. It's important to note that cast when damage taken requires a higher amount of damage to trigger linked gems, the higher the level of the cast when damage taken support gem is, but it cannot trigger gems that have a higher level requirement than itself. So always make sure to match the levels so that it works. Molten Shell works in a very similar way, but has a base duration of 3 seconds and a cooldown time of 4 seconds. During the Molten Shell buff, 75% of damage from hits is taken from the buff before your life or energy shield. The main difference for this effect is that the amount of damage that the buff can absorb is not based on the level of the skill gem, but it is equal to 20% of your character's armor at the time of casting the skill, up to a maximum of 10,000. This is a slightly higher percentage and a potentially much larger total amount than Steelskin can absorb. Therefore, at the point where your character's armor exceeds 10,000 without any buffs, you should definitely use Molten Shell over Steelskin, as long as your character does not depend on the bleed immunity from Steelskin. In addition, the buff grants a decent amount of flat armor and reflects a percentage of damage taken by the buff as fire damage when the buff expires or is fully depleted. The Vaal version, Vaal Molten Shell, has a much higher base duration of 9 seconds and can take a much higher amount of total damage. That is 30% of your character's armor up to a maximum of 30,000. However, it does only absorb 35 to 39% of the damage from hits, so while it lasts longer and provides more damage absorption in total, the relative damage mitigation it provides is lower for most hits in the game. Like all Vaal skills, it does cost souls and has a soul gain prevention time of 14 seconds on use, during which it cannot gain souls. Molten Shell and Vaal Molten Shell will replace each other's respective buffs when cast, but all guard skills share a cooldown, so you never run the risk of replacing your Vaal Molten Shell buff with the Molten Shell, as it will never be off cooldown while Vaal Molten Shell is active. Arcane Cloak is the only intelligence-based guard skill. Like Molten Shell, it also has a base duration of 3 seconds and a cooldown time of 4 seconds. It also provides a buff during which 75% of damage from hits is taken from the buff before your life or energy shield. However, in the case of Arcane Cloak, the size of the buff is based on the amount of mana spent when casting the skill. Arcane Cloak spends a percentage of your current mana that ranges from 45% to above 60% based on the level of the skill gem. Technically, it does not have a mana cost, the mana cost is 0, so cost modifiers do not affect the mana spent by the skill. It also grants global added lightning damage equal to 10 to 14% of the mana spent, which makes it useful in the mana stacking archetype niche. But currently, most builds are using the powerful route of reserving mana to run auras and other mana reservations, which makes it underwhelming as you do not have a large amount of current mana in those builds. So outside of the mana stacking archetype, I would not recommend using it at all. Immortal Call works a little bit different than the guard skills we looked at so far. It consumes up to 5 of your endurance charges on use, and based on how many it consumed, the buff lasts longer and is stronger. The base duration is 1 second only, and the cooldown is 3 seconds. For every endurance charge removed, the buff duration is increased by 20%. Based on the gem level, it provides between 25 and 34% less elemental damage taken and 25 to 35 less physical damage taken during buff effect. It provides another less physical damage taken multiplier based on endurance charges removed, which is 15% less physical damage taken per endurance charge. But that does not make you immune, as the less multiplier provided innately and the less multiplier provided based on the endurance charges are separate and therefore multiplicative with each other. For example, a level 1 Immortal Call with 5 endurance charges will give you a total of 81.25% less physical damage taken, not 100%. An efficient use of Immortal Call thus requires a reliable source of endurance charge generation. It is mostly used in setups that do not have enough armor to use Molten Shell, but at the same time have a large enough hit pool that the damage reduction that Steelskin would provide is not significant enough. These criteria mostly apply to builds that are energy shield based and utilize either low life or Chaos Inoculation. It is also noteworthy that Immortal Call does not help mitigate any Chaos damage whatsoever. Last but not least, we have Bone Armor, which is the only guard skill that is not provided by a skill gem. It is granted by Bone Barrier, a notable ascendancy passive of the Necromancer Witch Ascendancy. The skill is basically the same as Steelskin, but it does not only affect your character, but also your minions. It also has a 3-second instead of a 1.5-second duration, but it does have the same 3-second cooldown as Steelskin does. Because it is not granted by a gem, it does not have any level or attribute requirements. It also has the same total buff value as a level 20 Steelskin gem at all times, so at the time that you can unlock it, it is quite a bit stronger than using a Steelskin gem. In conclusion, unless you have a better option, you should always at least use Steelskin. Once your armor exceeds 10,000 permanently, that is without temporary buffs from your flasks, you should definitely use Molten Shell instead if you have another way to deal with bleeds, which you should have. If you do not have a large amount of armor, but can fit reliable endurance charge generation into your builds, while you have a larger than average hit pool, and you do not need additional mitigation against chaos skills, Immortal Call may be for you. In mana stacking builds that do not reserve mana and make good use of the flat added lightning damage, Arcane Cloak is the way to go. As for Bone Armor, I do believe that most Necromancers in endgame would prefer an Ascendancy passive skill tree that does not include Bone Barrier. But if you happen to pick up Bone Barrier, Bone Armor is straight up better than Steelskin. Like other skills in Path of Exile, the guard skills that are provided by skill gems have alternate qualities that provide different additional effects per quality. Also, both Merciless and Eternal Labyrinth allow you to enchant your helmet with an enchant that enhances a skill, and you may want to look into them if you are not interested in running another helmet enchant in your build. That's about it. I think that's all you need to know to get started using guard skills. Yo, thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, make sure you press the like button down below and leave a comment and tell me what I should explain in the next video. I want to wholeheartedly thank all the people who keep renewing their Twitch subscriptions, and of course a big shout out to the people who support me on Patreon, and you'll see me in the next video.